The Galactic Empire of had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their civilization stretched across 900 inhabited worlds, and their navy counted over 50 million warships. They were tall, elegant beings with silver skin and 4 arms. They believed themselves to be the highest form of life in the universe. Other species existed only to serve them or to be conquered. When their long-range sensors first detected the small blue planet called Earth, the Empire's Science Council dismissed it as unimportant. The planet was located in a quiet corner of the galaxy, far from any major trade routes. Its inhabitants had only recently discovered space travel. Their technology was primitive. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were laughable compared to plasma cannons. Emperor VII received the report about humanity with mild amusement. He was an ancient ruler over 300 years old, and he had conquered dozens of species during his reign. The humans would be no different. They would kneel before the Empire or they would be destroyed. There was no third option. The Empire sent a diplomatic vessel to Earth. It carried Ambassador, a veteran negotiator who had convinced 17 species to surrender peacefully. He arrived at the human capital and delivered the Empire's terms. Humanity would become a client species. They would pay tribute. They would provide workers and soldiers. In return, the Empire would allow them to continue existing. The human leaders listened carefully to these demands. They did not shout or argue. They did not threaten or beg. They simply asked Ambassador to wait while they discussed the matter among themselves. 3 days later, the humans gave their answer. It was not what the Empire expected. The human president, a calm woman named Sarah, stood before the ambassador and spoke clearly. She said that humanity refused the Empire's terms. She explained that humans had spent their entire history fighting for freedom. They had fought against their own tyrants, against oppression, against anyone who tried to take their liberty. They would not surrender that freedom to aliens from another world. But President did not stop there. She gave Ambassador a warning. She told him that the Empire should not attack Earth. She explained that humans were different from other species. They were survivors. They adapted. They never gave up. If the Empire attacked, the war would not end quickly. It would be long and terrible, and the Empire would regret starting it. Ambassador laughed at this warning. He had heard similar words from other species before. They always said they would fight. They always said they were different. They always lost within a few months. Humans would be no exception. He returned to the Empire and delivered his report. Emperor ordered the first Imperial fleet to conquer Earth. 50,000 warships departed for the human. The admiral in charge, a decorated warrior named, expected the campaign to last no more than 3 weeks. The fleet arrived in Earth's solar system with overwhelming confidence. Their sensors showed the human defense fleet numbered only 2,000 ships. They outnumbered them 25-1. Victory seemed certain. Admiral ordered the attack. The Imperial fleet advanced in perfect formation, their weapons charging for the first strike. The human ships held their position near Earth, waiting in silence. Then the humans sprung their trap. Hidden among the asteroids of the outer solar system, thousands of automated weapons platforms activated. They were simple machines, loaded with nuclear missiles and kinetic projectors. The humans had spent years building them in secret, preparing for exactly this moment. The first wave of missiles struck the rear of the Imperial fleet. 1,200 warships were destroyed in seconds. The formation broke apart as captains tried to respond to the unexpected attack. Before they could reorganize, the human fleet attacked. Their ships were smaller and less powerful, but they were fast and maneuverable. Human pilots flew with reckless courage, diving between the larger vessels and targeting their vulnerable points. Admiral had never seen anything like it. Other species fought to survive. Humans fought as if they wanted to die, as if death meant nothing to them. Their pilots crashed their damaged ships into cruisers. Their soldiers boarded enemy vessels and fought hand-to-hand in the corridors. They were relentless, fearless, unstoppable. The Battle of Saul lasted 14 hours. When it ended, the first Imperial fleet had been reduced to half its original strength. 25,000 warships had been destroyed. The humans had lost most of their fleet as well, but Earth remained free. Admiral retreated to Imperial space with his surviving ships. He reported to Emperor that the humans were more dangerous than expected. He recommended sending a much larger force for the second attack. The Emperor was furious. He had never lost a battle so badly. He ordered 5 fleets to assemble for a massive assault on Earth. 200,000 warships would crush the human resistance once and for all. While the Empire prepared for war, the humans were not idle. They knew the first victory was only the beginning. They worked day and night to build more ships, more weapons, more defenses. Their scientists studied the captured technology and began improving their own systems. But the humans also did something unexpected. They sent ambassadors to the other client species of the Empire. These were the conquered peoples who served against their will. The humans offered them hope. They promised that if they rose up against the Empire, humanity would stand with them. The message spread like fire through the galaxy. Species that had been oppressed for centuries began to whisper about rebellion. They had seen what the humans had done at Saul. They had seen that the Empire could be beaten. Perhaps freedom was possible after all. 6 months later, the Imperial Armada arrived at Earth. 200,000 warships faced a rebuilt human fleet of 8,000 vessels. The odds seemed impossible. But this time, the humans were not alone. As the battle began, ships from 12 client species joined the human formation. They were old ships, poorly armed, but they were willing to fight and die for freedom. The Second Battle of Saul was even more brutal than the first. It lasted 3 days. Both sides suffered terrible losses. The space around Earth became a graveyard of broken ships and floating debris. On the third day, something remarkable happened. The crews of several vessels against their officers. They were not themselves, but members of conquered species who had been forced to serve in the Imperial Navy. They had been inspired by the human example. They refused to fight for their oppressors any longer. The mutiny spread from ship to ship. The Imperial fleet began to collapse from within. Admiral found himself losing control of his own armada. The humans pressed their advantage. They pushed forward with everything they had left. Their ships, battered and broken, refused to retreat. Their soldiers, exhausted and wounded, kept fighting. When the battle finally ended, the Imperial fleet was destroyed. Only a few thousand ships escaped back to their territory. Admiral was not among them. His flagship had been rammed by a human cruiser whose captain had refused to surrender. The news of the second defeat reached the Empire like a shockwave. Rebellions erupted on dozens of worlds. Species that had been quiet for centuries rose up against their masters. The Empire's military was stretched thin, trying to suppress uprisings everywhere at once. Emperor realized too late that he had made a terrible mistake. The humans had warned him. They had told him that war would be long and terrible. They had told him the Empire would regret starting it. He had not listened. 1 year after the Second Battle of Saul, human ships appeared in space for the first time. They came not as conquerors, but as liberators. They helped the oppressed species fight for their freedom. They destroyed military installations and freed prisoners. The Empire crumbled faster than anyone expected. Systems that had been loyal for thousands of years declared independence. The great civilization, which had once seemed invincible, was falling apart. Emperor sent a message to President. He asked for peace. He offered to recognize human independence if they would stop supporting the rebellions. President refused. She reminded the Emperor of her original warning. She told him that humans never started fights, but they always finished them. The Empire had attacked Earth. Now the Empire would face the consequences. The war continued for 2 more years. Forces were pushed back to their home systems. Their allies abandoned them. Their client species joined the growing coalition led by humanity. In the final battle, the combined fleet of free species surrounded the. They had the power to destroy it completely, to wipe out the species that had oppressed them for so long. But the humans counseled mercy. They argued that destroying the would make them no better than the empire they had fought against. Justice did not require genocide. It required change. The coalition accepted this wisdom. They were allowed to survive, but their empire was dissolved forever. They became one species among many, equal to the others, no longer masters of anyone. A new galactic council was formed, with representatives from every free species. Humanity was given a seat of honor for leading the liberation, but the humans refused to claim leadership. They said they had not fought to replace one empire with another. They had fought for freedom, and freedom meant that every species should govern itself. The galaxy entered a new era of cooperation and peace. Trade flourished between worlds that had once been at war. Science advanced as species shared their knowledge freely. Old hatreds slowly began to fade. Ambassador, who had survived the war, was asked years later what lesson the galaxy should learn from what had happened. He thought for a long time before answering. He said that they had believed size and power were everything. They had conquered species by the dozens. They had ruled for thousands of years. They thought nothing could challenge them. But they had never faced a species like humanity. Humans were not the strongest or the most advanced. Their technology was primitive. Their numbers were small. By every logical measure, they should have been easy to conquer. What they failed to understand was the human spirit. Humans would rather die than surrender their freedom. They would fight against impossible odds. They would sacrifice themselves for each other and for strangers they had never met. They would never, ever give up. That was the warning President had given. That was what the Empire had ignored. And that ignorance had cost them everything. The old ambassador finished his story with one final observation. He said that in all his years of diplomacy, he had learned one simple truth. When humans give you a warning, you should listen to it. Because if you ignore it, you will pay a price higher than you can imagine. The galaxy had learned this lesson the hard way. The Empire was gone, remembered only in history books as a cautionary tale. And humanity, the small species from a quiet blue planet, had become something far more important than conquerors. They had become the guardians of freedom itself.